Good luck.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you all for coming. I'm a little bit nervous about these microphones. Let me know if they're not working well. And this is my first time giving a presentation with, I'm not using PowerPoint here, I'm using reveal.js, which lets me write my presentation in HTML, which I know, rather than PowerPoint, which I fight with. So let's see how it goes. Who am I? I'm currently a consultant at Northpoint Digital. We're hiring. If anyone has experience with Drupal, WordPress, or even .NET, we're trying to grow the Boston office, and talk to me. I'm a Vim guru. Vim is my text editor of choice. I don't just use it when I happen to be on a server and don't have my favorite IDE with me. I use it all the time. Sometimes I claim to be a Drupal expert. I think several months ago, I think last year, Moshe Weitzman came and gave a talk to PHP Meetup. When Moshe's in the room, I do not claim to be a Drupal expert. And I have a few hobbies. I like to bicycle, take a yoga class once a week, square dance, and play bridge. Past life, I was a math whiz. If you know what ARML or IMO means, or the Putnam, I did well on those. I've been a mathematician. I was a mathematician before I was a web designer, and I've been a teacher. And in fact, as recently as last summer, I spent 3 weeks teaching math over the summer to interested high school students. And I'll be grading a math exam, math contest this coming weekend. So I want to talk about coding standards. So this is the programmer's equivalent of a style guide. It's not about using your code efficiently. It's not necessarily about writing efficient code or various good code. It's like the punctuation, indentation, tabs. Do you use tabs or spaces? Anyone using tabs these days? Someone admits it. Do you or don't you put spaces around your operators, your plus signs and your concatenation dots? How do you format your comments? Do you use lowercase or uppercase for Boolean values, true and false, or for null? And how about line length? And you could argue for the importance of some of these or others. And there's certainly no one right answer for what's the right line length. So some people say 72, some people 75, 78, or 80. But what I really don't like is people who just let their lines go on and on and on, and 240 characters in a line, and it wraps across the screen. What's wrong with a line like that? Yeah. Right? If I look at it in my text editor and you look at it in your text editor, we'll see different things. And that also applies if you're using tabs rather than indenting with spaces. How many people use Git? OK. Git pays attention to your files line by line. Suppose you make one little change in your program, and that change is in a line that goes on for 240 characters. It's going to be hard to spot the difference. If you have short lines, then you make a change in one line, it's easier to see what the change is. Lowercase or uppercase for true and false, I can't see what difference it makes, but for a lot of things, consistency is what matters. And I guess I had a friend in college. He was writing C back in the day. And he had a coding standard of his own, that every function he wrote had to fit on one old-fashioned terminal screen. So it was, I think, 24 lines high by 80 characters wide. And his theory was that if he couldn't fit a function into that much space, it was trying to do too much. And these days we talk about the principle of having a single responsibility. A function should only do one thing. And you can have coding standards about variable names, like should variable names be short things like A and B and I, or should they be long descriptive things like this is a variable name? And if you just put a couple of things together, indentation standards, standards for how long a variable name should be or a function name, and how long you want your lines to be, you can quickly put yourself in a straitjacket. Right? If you want really long variable lines and lots of indentation and short lines, you can no longer code. So you have to decide which of those matters more to you, which makes your code more readable. So why does it matter? Why does the punctuation matter? Why does line spacing and indentation matter? So I claim that if you follow coding standards, your code will be consistent. And when I say you, I mean the plural you. You and everyone you're working with on a team. You and the people who will read your code in the future. You and the people who will modify your code in the future. You and your future self. And so that consistency alone matters. It makes things easier to follow. Am I the only one who's annoyed when I look at a file and I see it's all nicely indented consistently and then there's one line that juts out? Does that get your hackles up? So consistency. And we're in the Boston area, so of course, what's the famous quote about consistency from Emerson? It's one of the most often misquoted lines. The misquote is, which you hear all the time, is that consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. The full quotation is, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. So Emerson wasn't against consistency all the time, just by sort of blindly, unthinkingly trying for consistency. It's easier to parse your programs automatically if you have something that generates documentation from your code comments. It's important to have coding standards and following them. It's easier to maintain. Because maintenance isn't going to be a one-person job, it will be maintained by different people. If everyone is using the same coding standard, and if they've set up their text editors to automatically follow that, it's going to be a lot simpler. It's more efficient. It'll be more robust and error tolerant. And I'm just kidding about those two, because coding standards won't give you that. And of course, no talk is complete without a couple of examples of wisdom from XKCD, how standards proliferate. The situation is there are 14 competing standards. 14, ridiculous! We need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone's use cases. Yeah! And soon the situation is there are 15 competing standards. Haven't quite got this presentation software down. So how do you keep track of coding standards? I do work in Drupal. And I went to the web page, www.drupal.org/coding standards. And this was just the list of things on the page, indenting in whitespace, operators, casting, and on and on and on. And then there were a whole bunch of child pages. Now I'm a little in the compulsive direction, and I've actually read some of these pages. Most people don't bother. Even I have not read them all. So how do you keep track of what the coding standards are for the projects you're working on? So there has to be a better way than spending hours and hours reading through the documentation saying, oh, for Drupal, I have to put a space before and after an operator, whether it's a plus sign or a concatenation dot. For Drupal, my logical Boolean constants will be capitalized, true and false, and null will also be capitalized. But there has to be a better way than demanding that everyone on your team read all of that. And CodeSniffer is a tool that learns the rules for you. So one person defines the standards in a machine-readable form for CodeSniffer, and then why isn't Zoom working? And then you have some file, which was probably written by someone who didn't follow the coding standards carefully. You run phpcs. CS stands for code sniffer. That's the name of the program. You tell it which standard you want it to check for. This is a Drupal module, so it should obey the Drupal coding standards. And the program produces a list in this file, which was not written by me, which is not written by anyone at my company. There were 118 errors and 9 warnings on 84 lines, and it lists them all. So you can then go through this list one at a time, go to the appropriate line number, and fix the mistake. Life is so much better, right? And that certainly has to beat spending hours poring over and memorizing all the rules about white space and... No, but there has to be a better way. So the better way is to integrate with your text editor or your IDE. As I said at the beginning, I'm a Vim guru. I use Vim. I try not to get involved in the pointless argument about whether Vim is a text editor or an IDE. But CodeSniffer is able to produce machine-readable output, either XML or CSV or something, and then Vim, with the appropriate plugin, sucks in that report that we saw on the previous slide. Go back to that for a second. Sucks in the XML or the CSV version of this, and then puts a little marker in the left margin wherever there's a warning. Warnings are green or yellow, and errors are in red. And this is just a screenshot, but if I were actually using Vim, then hovering over one of these marked lines would give me a little pop-up window saying what the problem is, or at least what the first problem on this line is. This line has 2 problems because code comments are supposed to be full sentences. They're supposed to start with a capital letter. That's one mistake. And they're supposed to end with a period, an exclamation point, or a question mark. That's missing, so that's the second error. So the first of those errors would show up if I were to hover over this. So there's an even better way. And this is fairly recent. Is there anyone in this room who's already using CodeSniffer regularly? Just a few. And they're all sitting way in the back. Why is that? So I've been using CodeSniffer for a while, I think over a year. And nobody told me, but when version 2.0.0 was released last December, it solved the problem that had had me tearing my hair out. You know, OK, CodeSniffer, you tell me this line should be indented with 6 spaces, but only has 4. Why do you tell me that? Why can't you just fix it? You tell me that there are supposed to be spaces around my plus sign. Well, why not just put them in? And the answer to why not is that actually that's kind of complicated. And you don't want a program automatically modifying your code until it's been sort of carefully tested and developed. And when version 2.0.0 came out, the main new feature in it was that it came with a second function, not just CodeSniffer, but the Code Beautifier and Fixer, or PHP CBF, Code Beautifier and Fixer. And this screenshot on this slide is just the bottom of that report that we saw on the last slide. And this line at the bottom says PHP CBF can fix the 109 marked violations automatically. So there was this column with the X's in it. You can't see my cursor. And those X's indicate problems that can be fixed. So an indentation problem, sure, we can fix that automatically. Spaces around an operator, yes, we can fix that automatically. If you have a standard that says variables should be written with underscores, or contrary-wise, you have a standard that says they should be written in camel case, that's not an error that's going to be fixed automatically. Well, maybe in a future version. But so far, some things can be fixed and some can't. So running program is just this command line. Instead of calling phpcs code sniffer, you call phpcbf, the same options on your file. And you can, of course, do more than one file at a time if you want. And it produces this reasonably unverbose, what's the opposite of verbose? Reasonably concise output. Changes into some directory, it processes this file, it fixes them. I think it does it iteratively. So maybe what's going on is that if there are multiple problems on a line, it fixes one on one pass and then goes through and checks again. And after a few passes, see it made 5 passes, none are left that it knows how to fix, and it took 1 1/4 seconds. Can you see that? I'm still kind of nervous about letting some program rewrite my code. So what I like to do is take the file I'm editing, make a temporary copy of it, run phpcbf on that, and then compare the two side by side. And I have a diff tool built into my text editor. So I use Vim for everything. I use Vim for comparing diffs. And certainly can't make out the individual characters, I think, on the screen. But if you, and you can't see my cursor either, can you? Maybe you can. There's a column here of spaces that have been added, and the differences between the left side and the right side are highlighted, so you can see that. So, so here there's now a space on both the left as well as the right of the concatenation dot. There's a space on either side of this equal sign. This code comment has been capitalized. And also this one on the very last line in the screenshot has been capitalized. And I think we have time for a quick demo. Is this the one I want? No, I wanted the other one. There we go. Oh, but it's off the screen. Oh, this might not work. Oh, well. Guess I won't do the demo. Oh, and by the way, that process of copying, running php cbf on it, and then opening it in a split diff window, of course, I've bundled that sequence of steps into one command. So I can just say :php cbf, enter, and it all happens automatically. So pretty much out of the box, CodeSniffer comes with standards for PEAR, the older PHP packaging system. It comes with its own PHP-CS standards, comes with support for PSR 1 and 2, so sort of emerging standards for object-oriented PHP. Squiz is the company that makes CodeSniffer. Comes with Zen standards. That's out of the box. I've installed Drupal and Drupal Practice. That second set of standards sort of is more controlling, trying to make you adhere to best practices. And there are also WordPress standards. I think WordPress has been very active in supporting and testing CodeSniffer. I don't do WordPress. I haven't tried that out yet. Defining a standard. Let me peek at how many slides are left. Oh no, escape doesn't work. Oh well. So to define the standard, why am I getting the pinwheel? Oh, there we go. No, there's no. You define a class. Yeah. All right. With a rather verbose name. And it implements the class PHP CodeSniffer, or it extends the class PHP CodeSniffer sniff. No, it implements. That means CodeSniffer sniff is an interface. You give it a public variable which says which sorts of files it supports. You register the tokens it recognizes. So the way PHP CodeSniffer works is it calls, I think, the core PHP tokenizing function, which returns so many spaces, one variable name, another space, an operator, a space. Each of those is called a token. And the class I'm looking at pays attention to the comparison tokens, operators, assignment, and inline if. And this is a public method that then merges those 4 or 5 arrays, removes any duplicates by using array unique, and returns the result. And then the hard part of implementing a standard, I was looking at what I thought would be a simple example, just the standard that says you have to have a space before and after each operator. Turns out that's not so simple. There are all sorts of edge cases, like you have dot equals, that one operator is that two, and it takes a few dozen lines to work through the logic. But anyway, you define one public method on your class called process with some specified input and return values, and that's what it takes. So one such class is called a sniff, and a collection of such classes, and maybe an XML file to describe them all, defines your coding standard. And here I was just looking at one example of the token array. So what is the input to this process function? And a single token was an equal sign, which has the type t_equal. I don't know what the code does. It tells me what line and column that character is in. The length is 1. If I had 4 spaces, the length would be 4. If I had a variable name, the length would be the number of characters. Level, I think that's counting nested parentheses. I'm not sure what conditions do. But the tokenizer just generates all this information that you can then use in deciding whether your operator is appropriately surrounded by a space on either side. Installation just takes a few lines. How many people are using Composer to install packages? How many people have heard of Composer? Ooh, only a minority. Maybe we should get Larry Garfield in here to give a talk on Composer. He thinks it's the greatest thing since GitHub. So there's been a lot of progress in the last few years in getting different PHP projects to communicate with each other and to cooperate. And in order to get that to work, you need to have some standards, which the PHP community has resisted for a long time because, hey, we're all doing our own thing. But Composer is a dependency manager, so it allows you to install packages that depend on other packages and get the right versions and have them all in one directory so they don't conflict with different versions of the same packages installed for some other project. So it basically takes one line to install CodeSniffer. You call Composer. You say global, I'm going to install this for general use on the system rather than just in the current directory. And you require squizlabs/php_CodeSniffer, which is basically part of URL on the Packagist website. May as well be part of URL on GitHub. And the equal star is some rather loose description of what version you're looking for. Since I'm installing it that way, the files will end up in my home directory, .composer subdirectory, vendor subdirectory / bin. So I add that to my path. Of course, there are other ways of managing this. You may or may not want to modify the path on your system. After doing those 2 lines, I confirm that I've installed version 2.3.2. And phpcs-i gives me a list of installed standards. And this is pretty much the list that I said was installed out of the box on the previous slide. Pretty much the same procedure if you want to install it, including the Drupal standards. If you just require Drupal/coder, that declares a dependency on CodeSniffer, so that'll automatically install CodeSniffer. You can just use this command instead of using both. And then the installed standards includes Drupal and Drupal practice. And then just a page of references where you can get more. The home page, the wiki documentation, the blog where they'll announce significant new releases, and how to install it for use with Drupal. And I'm pretty much on. I'm pretty much on time. Whew.
Yeah, nice work. Any questions? No questions. Here we go, Ryan.
So one challenge I have with using like Code Beautifier is that when you change your source code, let's say you have your code version control, and you modify to make it prettier, you're losing comments. You're losing the most recent comment that touched that code. So say I changed this line of code because we need to avoid this really catastrophic bug, and then it gets beautified, and the commit message that now the most recent commit message says make everything beautiful. Like how do you deal with that tension there?
OK, so I have to repeat the question. So Ryan asked a really good question about how this works with version control. And the point is that if you have some code under Git or CVS, whatever, and you change a line to fix a bug, you make a commit. Your commit message has important information about why you made that change. But then what happens if someone comes along and rewrites your entire file using something like PHP-CBF, touching half the lines in the file, and then commits that with a message saying, well, I fixed it to obey coding standards. Yeah, that's going to make it harder to find your commit message that you entered while fixing the bug. So there are various approaches to this. One is never worry about coding standards. And sort of the opposite extreme is that you follow coding standards from the start. You can be really controlling and say in your Git commit hooks that you won't accept code that doesn't pass coding standards review. And you can have various responses in between. You can say, OK, our code is a mess. June is going to be code cleanup month, and we're going to clean up all of our code now that we have this automated tool that makes it a lot faster and more convenient. And yes, any commit messages that we made before June are going to be harder to find, because when I look at a line and I ask git blame, it tells me that the line was beautified. It doesn't tell me that a bug was fixed. But after June, we're not going to run into that trouble anymore. And part of that solution is to build the code sniffer into your text editor or your IDE, so that as you're editing the file, it's pointing out mistakes. And once the code is cleaned up, it stays that way. Sound fair?
All right. So we should get rolling with the rest of the stuff. We give Benji a round of applause. Thanks, Benji.
Thank you.